There is a prevailing belief that many consider Attack on Titan to be a rip-off of Code Geass. This is usually in reference to a specific event. If you know, you know. Now, I don't subscribe to this belief as it only lessens the brilliance of both series, but it is interesting that in both stories, the main characters have a half-brother who's of royal descent with blonde hair around the same age that serves as their main antagonist, where both Eren and Lelouch tricked them to gain the ultimate power to enact their plans, ultimately turning their half-brothers into their puppets. Our blonde brothers both detest their father and actively work against him. In Zeke's case, it was to avoid his parents' fate. With Schneizel, he wanted to gain control of Britannia because Charles didn't show any care for his people, and from what we know of both, their dislike for their father is justified. It's also interesting how both have a similar demeanor where they are usually calm and collected, only showing their anger in tense situations. Both are held up in high regard for their intelligence and leadership. I'm sure these similarities are just a coincidence, but given that they exist, it only makes sense to then compare their master plans. I think it's also appropriate to discuss the opposing solutions to both Eren and Lelouch's plans as a great lead up to that future discussion. So which plan was better, Schneizel's peace through the Flayas, or Zeke's peace through euthanizing the Eldian race? Let's find out. While it would be easy to simply start criticizing their actions, I think it's more important to first understand the mindset of these characters. Understanding their perspective will lead to a more productive analysis of their plans, starting with Zeke, who grew up in Marley, experiencing their bigotry that all Eldians faced. As a child, this one interaction influenced his future ideology.
Your kind used to massacre everyone they could. You should be wiped out, so why are you breeding?
His entire perspective was further influenced by the hatred of the Marleyans and his own father. Zeke eventually realized that this hatred won't end with peace between both sides. Marley will never forgive the Eldian Empire's past atrocities, and at least right now the world still has to fear the Titans. So once Tom told him about the Founder's ability to alter the biology of every Eldian, Zeke had an epiphany of what must be done. Take back the founding Titan, then use its power to prevent the Eldians from breeding, saving them and the world from future suffering. He believes in a form of antinatalism, where the Eldians would have been better off if they were never born, since their lives were destined to be full of suffering. What that man told Zeke's family became the motivator behind his plan. Zeke was under so much pressure as a child by his parents, never experiencing the fantasy of the perfect childhood. Instead, only facing the hatred of the world aside from Tom. So I completely understand why he just wants all this hatred to end, willing to kill his own race to do it. I'll revisit these ideas later on. For now, let's talk about Schneizel. His plan also originated from his upbringing. As a privileged Britannian prince, he saw the world from a safe distance under the rule of his father. Despite Charles' dominance over the world, conflict still arose, and this saddened Schneizel, or in some cases outright disturbed him, especially when he realized that Charles doesn't care about the present or his empire, or maybe anyone for that matter.
A man who's lost interest in this world, who sees his people locked in a life and death struggle and shrugs in indifference, such a man has no right to rule.
I don't know when Schneizel officially decided this, but he concluded that it should be him who rules the world, not Charles. Through the years from observing the world, Schneizel came to a realization. Mankind only understands war. Mankind wants someone to police them, regardless if they want peace.
The true nature of people is this. They want to be controlled by their nation, their religion, their traditions, and by figures of grand authority.
So therefore, to ensure peace, someone must become the ultimate superpower. This is what led Schneizel to fund the creation of the Flaw warheads and maybe even the Special Corps itself. With these weapons of mass destruction, Schneizel could end all conflicts by ruling the world with fear, killing those who would threaten the peace. If required, he would become a god. Just like Zeke, from Schneizel's perspective, this is a reasonable conclusion and the best solution. I would argue it's a limited perspective, but that's kind of the point. Schneizel only saw the world from a safe distance. When comparing these two mindsets, the key difference is how they viewed themselves in solving these problems. Schneizel saw himself as the solution, where Zeke saw himself as the problem. Thus, Schneizel continued his father's dominance of the world, only taking it a step further. By contrast, Zeke decided to wipe out himself and the rest of his people to end the conflict. It's an interesting difference between ruling with an ultimate power or wiping it out from existence. I guess in Zeke's case, he knows that the former didn't work in the past, so the latter was the better option. With Schneizel, the world was working under the former, but the power controlling it wasn't strong enough to end conflict. So Schneizel simply had to carry a bigger stick, if you will. That's why these characters chose to enact their plans. Now it's time to start discussing each one, first going over the cons. For Zeke, it starts with the over-reliance on every Eldian agreeing to this plan. Even if he removed their ability to have children, the rest of the world will still try to enact revenge. If that weren't the case, then we wouldn't even be at this point. Therefore, both the founder and a titan of royal blood must be continually passed onto other people, so the rumbling will remain a deterrent until the Eldians die out. But this would require the Eldians to organize a system where the founder and the royal blood is systematically passed between them. I estimate it would take at least 14 Eldians, 7 for each titan, over a span of 98 years for this to work. That would be difficult to pull off because Astoria needs to have 7 children, and the children have to live long enough to inherit the titan. Having Astoria's children only inheriting the titan from a normal Eldian when the rumbling is required could be a solution here, but after that, the same problem will just happen again. Also, consider that the pool of people to inherit the founder will significantly decrease over time, making it increasingly difficult to keep this going. Early on, this seems doable. Towards the end years, probably not. Maybe by then it wouldn't matter, as the majority of the Eldians would probably be dead. So at the very least, Zeke's plan guarantees most Eldians could live out their lives in peace. I imagine that the few that would remain by the end probably won't. Now, another counter argument to my issue here is that while the rest of the world recovers from the partial rumbling, the Eldians on Paradise Island will advance their weaponry. So it's possible that they may not need the rumbling when the rest of the world is ready to attack again. A good argument in theory, but I do wonder if there's enough time for this to happen. And then you have to consider if the opposing militaries would also develop even stronger weapons by then. Even Hanji wasn't too confident with this one. Maybe the economic collapse of the world would prevent this outcome. Either way, it's hard to base the future of your people on quite a gamble. Then we get to more problems here. If some Eldians don't agree with this, then they could use the founder to undo Zeke's alteration, thus ruining the plan. It's extremely likely after Zeke, Historia, and Aaron are gone from this world, other characters might work to undo this plan. Also, how would this affect the Eldians around the world? Without the ability to reproduce, would Marley let them go or continue to persecute them? I assume they would keep the Titan inheriting process going until the end, so the lives of those Eldians may not die as peacefully as the ones on the island. The plan seems too vulnerable to many factors that Zeke can't control because he'll be gone for most of this. There's a theory that Zeke doesn't actually care if the Eldians live the rest of their lives in peace. He simply came up with this entire scheme just to get everyone on Paradise Island to go along with the plan. An interesting theory for sure, of which there are many counterexamples. Now let's talk about Schneizel's plan. Like Zeke, his plan also relied on too many dependencies, with the biggest that the system required his leadership or people like him to sustain it. If Schneizel dies for any reason, the system could easily collapse. And not only would it collapse, but if Schneizel did discipline humanity, the instability of his death would probably leave the world in a worse state before he took power. That assumes there wasn't civil unrest prior to this. So in other words, the peace won't last. Also, his successors might free the world from the Flayas, or maybe go further and kill more people. The plan also heavily relied on the Flayas and the Democles. If he ran out of Flayas, or if someone created a stronger weapon, then it's game over. People like Nina could also spill the beans on how to create or counter the Flaya in secret. The same scenario applies to the Damocles itself. One of the problems with critiquing Schneizel's plan is that it wasn't fully explored, so there are some unknowns. For example, what's the new government gonna be like under Schneizel's control? Is he involved in every meeting, or does it interfere until violence breaks out? How does Schneizel intend to police the world outside the Flayas? Would this go into Light's level of control, or how far is Schneizel willing to go to ensure everlasting peace? Now, something that was hinted is that Schneizel was going to eliminate all militaries and become the sole protector of the world. Almost a similar situation of the first Justice League episode, just replace Superman with Schneizel's Damocles. Obviously, Superman wouldn't kill people to ensure the peace, but still served as the protector of the world. Well, at least not this Superman. Now, if we're talking about the Justice Lords, well, that's a different conversation entirely. Oh, and if you're wondering where I came to this conclusion, Schneizel said the following.
Are you saying you don't need the Black Knights anymore?
For what purpose would a collective military strength possibly serve?
I might alter some of my opinions if the answer to these questions were positive, but based on Lelouch's actions, I'm going to assume that Schneizel would take things too far. I mean, Schneizel did allow Lelouch to become emperor just to justify his plans and was willing to kill billions as a starting point. These are quite disturbing and doesn't give me any confidence to the future of this police state. Schneizel would probably just keep moving the goalpost by finding more excuses to use the Flayas. I wonder how stable the world would be if everyone was just walking on eggshells knowing that one person was the judge, jury, and executioner of their lives. It's quite horrible when you think about it. Now, something that I don't understand is if Schneizel was already conquering or made peace treaties with other nations, why even resort to this at all? He almost completed a peace treaty with the Black Knights, but in fairness, part of that may have come from the threat of the Flayas. The other things I mentioned did not, so I don't understand the contradictory actions here. Now, while these plans seem significantly flawed based on what I've just said, there are some positives that could come from them. Otherwise, why would both men even attempt it? If Zeke's plan succeeds, the Eldians on the island will live out the rest of their lives in peace. When the Eldians die, so too will the Titans, thus ending the endless cycle of hatred and violence between the two factions. The plan also limits the casualties despite technically being genocide. Obviously, this includes the deaths of those in Liberio and the combined alliance of all the world's militaries. We're talking the difference between billions and millions. This of course could change if Marley attacks the island, which would result in the rumbling. That probably wouldn't happen for a long time, since under Zeke's plan, the military was crippled in the destruction of Liberio and the partial rumbling, which wiped out the combined military forces that gathered to retaliate for the attack of Liberio. I imagine that the threat of the rumbling alone would dissuade people to not attack the island. Schneizel's plan would have similar benefits, but instead of peace for just one country, the concept is expanded to the world. For if anyone did cause any problems, Schneizel would unleash the Flayas to end those conflicts. Essentially, the Flayas and the rumbling are quite similar in this regard. Part of Schneizel's plan also involved bombing the militaries in the world, thus preventing any major conflicts. If he abolishes other militaries, he would become the sole protector, then theoretically peace would arise from the fear from the Flayas. So after going through the pros and the cons of these plans, is there a clear winner among them? Well, one thing that Zeke's plan has on Schneizel's is it relies on less factors for it to succeed, and there's a clear, measurable objective. Once the Eldians die off in peace, the plan ends and is considered a success, where Schneizel's plan doesn't, since his goal is maintaining peace rather than destroying something evil. Also, Zeke is only temporarily relying on the power of the Titans, where Schneizel will have to rely on the Flayas or something like it for the entirety of his plan. Now, both plans seem like they would only work for the short term and not the long term. This is more of a problem with Schneizel, since Zeke isn't trying to eliminate all conflict forever, rather just end the Titans from the equation with the cycle of hatred that came along with it. But as we saw from the end of Attack on Titan's manga, the cycle could start again, making Zeke's work completely pointless. At least the new cycle wouldn't affect the current Eldians that Zeke was trying to save. And with Schneizel's plan, it seems like any other dictatorship where it lives and dies by its leader. Future generations could undo his work or go further and cause more destruction, and that latter option only exists because Schneizel created the Flaws. At least Zeke's plan would remove this power from the world. Of course, the end of Attack on Titan also somewhat contradicts this because conflict still occurred on the island with massive bombings. It's almost like the power of modern warfare replaced the terror of the Titans. Now, while Zeke was aware that the age of the Titans was coming to an end, part of the plan was really trying to save the Eldians while also getting rid of the Titans, and I believe the emphasis was saving the Eldians. That's why I don't fault Zeke here for this eventual outcome. And in the case of Code Geass, after Lelouch's death, the world did destroy the Flaws along of how to make them, so it can go both ways. Now, on a positive note, both plans at least were set up to succeed by eliminating the major threats to both. Schneizel and Zeke plan on wiping out the major militaries, Schneizel using the Flaws, and Zeke suggesting a partial rumbling. So depending on how you look at things, neither plan is perfect, but in theory does accomplish the goal. So which is better? Well, that's the thing. Neither one is. They are both horrific plans, because in their quest to save humanity and bring peace, they didn't carefully consider the human element. What is the purpose of life if no one can live it? Both men were too analytical and detached from the very people they wanted to save. Schneizel was a spoiled prince who only understood humanity from a distance. That's why he based his plan on theories rather than an actual understanding of humanity. Schneizel came up with the logical solution, forgetting that people are both logical and emotional beings. This is what Lelouch was trying to explain to Schneizel, but he was too smart for his own good. Yes, Schneizel's plan could technically end the current conflicts, but it doesn't address the cause of why these things happen in the first place, which is why his plan will ultimately fail. Instead of helping the world move towards a bright future that can solve these problems, Schneizel instead decides to keep the world in a perpetual state of now because he can't guarantee a bright future, but he can guarantee a peaceful present. What's even the point of peace if it comes from taking away people's freedom? To quote this conversation from the Justice Lord episode of Justice League.
Think about it. A world where there's no crime, no victims, no pain, and no choice. The problem with democracy is it doesn't keep you very safe. It has other virtues, but you seem to have forgotten them. I didn't forget. I just chose peace and security instead. You grabbed power!
Zeke is exactly the same, for he decided to go forward with this plan before even meeting a single Eldian on Paradise Island. He was willing to wipe them all out without even considering their consent. While on the island, he viewed the Eldians as sad fools in sacrificing their lives, because in his mind, they were trying to stop him from saving them. And obviously he knows what's best for these people, saying all of this as he killed them. The irony is not lost here. Beyond this, both solutions are extremely immoral. Zeke wants to commit genocide and mass murder to ensure his plan succeeds, and he's willing to sacrifice the innocent, all because he believes that it would be better to not have been born as an Eldian. If Zeke doesn't want to have children because he's an anti-natalist, that's fine, but who gave him the right to decide that fate for everyone else? From an analytical point of view, you can argue that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And that sounds all wonderful until you become the few. As I said before, these men were too analytical in their solutions. And when it comes to those solutions, I'd argue that Schneizel's is even more immoral than Zeke's, because he was willing to kill anyone that prevented the peace, going as far to commit a rumbling of sorts to kill billions of people. Once enough people are dead, the world will be in peace and in pieces. The plan is messed up because Schneizel will have to keep doing this until each conflict ends. In his quest to create a peaceful world, he will create the opposite and cause more damage than anyone in history. How could someone be so smart while acting foolish at the same time? Zeke and Schneizel were corrupted individuals who took it upon themselves to become false gods. Through their hubris, they had decided the future of those alive today and those yet to be born. They don't actually care about the people they're supposedly trying to help. If they did, genocide and mass murder wouldn't be on the table. Ironically, Schneizel once said in context to Lelouch's failed Black Rebellion that he missed the forest for the trees. I can't think of a better way to summarize the failures of both Zeke's and Schneizel's plans. Thanks for watching as always. This was a difficult video to make, requiring multiple drafts of the script, so I hope you appreciate it. Now that I've discussed how Zeke and Schneizel got it wrong, it's time to find out if Aaron or Lelouch got it right. Until then, I recently compared Gabi to Nina to determine who's worse, which you can watch right here.